So next step. Now I want to talk a little bit about testing my code. I have, to start getting some good testing, I found a few articles about it and tried to kind of wrap my head around them and then find the easiest solution for you guys. And I'm not sure I got to the point where it's the easiest solution, but it's fairly simple solution. I also tried to kind of make the same setup that you guys are used to from working with the C# applications with the clean architecture, but there's a few things I had to change to be more specific for this setup right here. So first of all, notice how simple my index file is right now. It doesn't have a lot of code anymore because I started to split up my files to make it easier for you to reuse your code, maybe to make helpers, and I'll do that for Wednesday. I'll try and make a few helpers to make it easier to rewrite code in my testing setup, and also to make the code a lot more structured and, in my mind, a lot easier to read and understand. So the first file right here, the index.ts file, and of course it's right here under the source folder. You need to have an index file there. That's kind of the place that launches your entire function setup. So you need to have an index file there. You cannot remove this. Now, pretty much all it's doing right now is just, it's setting up the basic configuration. So I need to have an admin. I need to use functions. I've added this new DependencyFactory. I'll show you that in a second. Think of this as our old file that was kind of launching everything in the C# solution. So if you guys remember, in the old solution, we kind of had dependency injection in the startup file, right? So that was where we set up all our dependency injection. Now I wanted to kind of get the same feeling with this new solution, so you guys could have one file and one area where you could do your dependency injection, something similar to this. But of course it's simpler because it's something I made on my own, but it's the exact same idea. Let's try and jump back now to that file, the DependencyFactory. It's just the TS file I wrote right here, and notice all I'm doing right here is just saying, if I want to use a product controller, I'm going to get a product controller, which is an interface. And the way I'm going to build it is I need a repository, I need a service, and the service uses the repository. And then I need the controller for Firebase, in this case, using that service. So that's kind of the layering I have in my setup right here. And let me just try and talk about that using this beautiful tool we have. So I'll just remove the sharing and jump to a whiteboard. Okay, so let's just undo that. So here's how my mindset was. So we have Firebase right here, FB. So this is Firebase functions. Now we also use, let's just put F right here for functions. Yes, I know there are letters up there, but so this is going to be Firestore. So again, Firebase Firestore. There we go. Firebase Firestore. So I kind of decided to try and make a setup that you guys can use, where we have, first of all, we are going to have a controller, just like you did. You had a controller, right? So this will be the controller. Oh my God. It's so hard to read, but this is the controller right here. And that's kind of, functions is going to send its request to the controller. So we're going to have a trigger right here that's going to send its request to the controller. And then the controller is going to send the data. It's going to convert the data to something we want to use and then send that data to the service. So here we are going to have a service. Man, those letters are beautiful. And then from the service, we're going to send that data to a repository. So again, you notice it's the same idea like you did in the C# solution. And I just want to kind of give you guys something that referenced that. And then of course the repository is then going to communicate together with the Firestore, right? But again, notice because of this setup right here, what we are going to test is going to be the service. And since everything is now going to be pretty much interfaces, it's going to be a lot easier to do the unit testing like you used to. Or you've tried last semester. I know you're not used to it because it was a very quick introduction, but still, that's what we're going to try and do. So let's try and go back to the code, because with this, maybe it's easier to comprehend the code I built. I have inside my dependency factory, again, I have these different layers now. I have repository layer, service layer, and Firebase, which will be the controller layer talking to the functions. Each layer has its own responsibility. And let me just try again to start with the Firebase, the repository layer right here. Notice, first of all, I've made an interface for the repository, right? All it does is pretty much open up for the different things I need to work with, in this case, Firebase. And Firestore, I have a set and a delete function that I'm using right now. And notice again, I'm very feature-driven, so I don't have full CRUD right here because I don't need full CRUD right now. And I think you guys should start working with that mindset. Don't create full CRUD, just create the different things you need and then extend on it slowly. Then you could actually start doing test-driven development if you wanted to later on. Let's try and go back. So that's the interface. Now I'm going to need an implementation for the interface, and I decided to make this one the implementation, which is pretty much just means that I'm going to use the product repository right here. Okay. Again, since the product repository uses like the implementation class like this, I could switch this. Instead, I make a new one for Azure, right? I could make a new one for Azure that does something completely different. And just like you would do then inside your C# setup, you would go in here and you would just change it for Azure right here, and then you would be working with Azure instead. This is kind of the goal for me to make that same setup. So now I'll jump into the code later, but that's my repository, my communication with the database. Now using the repository, I made an implementation class called product service, and that's going to use that repository now to communicate and work with the database right here. So that's the middle layer, right? That's the service, and this is what you're going to test. And then the final one that I'm going to use is then the controller, and the controller is the guy who talks to functions. So the controller right here, again, I made an interface. So I have the Firebase controller, and the Firebase controller right here gets the service, and then all it's doing pretty much is it converts the data that I'm getting from functions into products, and then I'm passing in those products to the service. So notice this is where I'm going to do the function-specific logic, right? You guys have already used this where you say snap before and snap after, and you use the context parameters. But notice I'm hiding all of that inside this controller right here, and then I'm giving the service actual data that it can use. So the service is only going to get an ID and 2 different products. That's all I'm sending to the service, because then I can be very specific with my testing. Sweet. So that's the work for the dependency factory right here. And then of course, I'm going to, as I start expanding my product, I would get more controllers here. But notice how simple it is for me to go later on and go and switch out repositories, switch out controllers. So I could start working with Azure instead again if I wanted to. So I would have a REST API or whatever I wanted. Instead of using Firebase, I could start using a MS SQL database later. I could just switch this if I wanted to and just work with Azure, right? So it's very easy for me. And again, we have the heart of our application, the core, which is the service in the middle right here. So I've made my own small dependency system right here. It's not perfect, but it's working, okay? There are actually packages that could help me make it just like you see in Angular, but let's just keep it simple like this, then you have full control yourself.